Hello, everyone. It's been so wonderful getting to meet so many of you, and I feel so grateful to be invited here and on such an awesome panel with people I admire so much. So my name is Zach. I am the co-director and co-founder of Camp Common Ground. We are a nonprofit based in the Bay Area with a mission to disrupt cycles of racial and economic segregation. We do that by bringing middle schoolers from diverse backgrounds together for a 2-week overnight summer camp where they build skills in empathy, intercultural understanding, and leadership. And they actually take those skills back with them during the school year to make their own schools more inclusive places. So long title of the talk, but I've really loved this conference, and it was great that we started off kind of defining some terms around moral development, moral reasoning, critical consciousness, and then talked a lot about the settings that need to be in place in order for it to feel safe, for there to be the community building. And I'm so excited to be on a panel where now we're talking about, okay, now we're in the room, now it's safe, what do we actually do, right? What does the programming look like? What are these interventions? And it was great to see that, youth participatory action research and some of these other methods that Rob talked about really intertwine really well with what we do. Oh, and I'll just say, what I'm gonna kind of argue is that really the pedagogy, one really important pedagogy that we can be employing to this end is game-based and simulation-based pedagogy. So I'll explain a little bit what that means in a second. So first, just a little bit about me and my co-founder, Ron. I am a 6th grade and 7th grade math teacher at a public school in East Oakland. It is a lot doing this full-time and this, so if there's any funders out there who want to help with that, that'd be great. And Ron is also an educator. He is an assistant principal in Oakland and was a teacher for about 10 years. And we're really close friends and from really different backgrounds, and we think that's really important in the work that we do. I am a Jewish guy, hetero-performing from the East Coast, upper-middle-class family. Ron is a black gay man from Detroit, from a lower middle class background, and we think it's really important that we talk about those things as we feel like our backgrounds do influence our perspectives and the way we come to this work and our own styles of communication, among other things. And we really ask ourselves to do the work that we ask our kids to do. And so we use a lot of those aspects of dialogue and empathy with one another. So what do we do at camp? Well, has anyone here been to camp? Yeah, oh, great. Anyone been to overnight camp? All right, wow. So I went to a Jewish summer camp for 10 years of my life growing up, for 2 months every summer. My parents shipped me off. And it was a really powerful experience for me, as I'm sure it was for many of you, and a really powerful socializing tool in terms of helping me define my identity and community. But as I got older, I felt that the program I was in was really limiting, right? It told me, your identity and community is really in this sort of upper middle class, Ashkenazi, white Jewish community. And as I got older, that didn't really resonate anymore. So we wanted to see, could we use that same really powerful socializing tool, but to bring kids together who aren't normally considered part of the same community. So we do a lot of what you might find at a traditional overnight summer camp, swimming, hiking, archery, all that good stuff that leads to that community building that's sort of the prerequisite to be able to do deeper work. But because we are a leadership program, we also have 3 workshops every day on our 3 core skills: empathy building, intercultural understanding, and leadership development. And I'll talk more about those in a minute. And we are a program where kids have to apply online and interview to get in. So we do really consider it sort of a selective process. There's only about 30 or 40 kids every summer, and we really invest in them. And then I do want to add that since we are asking them to go back during the school year and make change in their schools, for us to really meet our mission of disrupting cycles of segregation, we do feel a need to support them during the school year. So each kid actually leaves camp with something called a plan for disruption, where they have picked a kid or a group of kids in their school who they feel like are being excluded due to some aspect of their identity, and then they take steps, they make a plan to actually include that person using the skills that they learned at camp. So currently, we have 4 reunions during the school year to help support them with that. They ultimately present to their families as well. But again, if there's any funders out there that want to help us out, we're really trying to expand and deepen our school year partnerships and really have clubs at different schools with leadership coaching so they can really transform the climate and cultures of their own schools. Okay, so any teachers in the audience? Got some teachers, great. And I know Rob already mentioned sort of backwards planning, so that's one of the sort of fundamental frameworks for curriculum design. And so we really take as much of a sort of teaching approach as we can to teaching these skills that sometimes seem a little fuzzy: intercultural understanding, empathy. What do those mean? And we are both math teachers, and so we like to be concrete. So we sort of put them in, campers will be able to, students will be able to kind of actionable sentences. So for example, with empathy, we'll talk about that students need to be able to share vulnerably their own stories in order to build relationships. And they practice that in our broken heart exercise where they have to share things that broke their heart. Our empathy sequence also includes really concrete skills like being able to paraphrase for feelings and needs, being able to use nonviolent communication to resolve conflicts, being able to ask unassuming questions, right? So we try and really have them walk away with a set of skills that they can use when they go try and transform their own schools. So then you have to move to the pre-skills, right? Now that we've defined our outcomes, then what are the pre-skills? And so we use a variety of sort of theater-based, drama-based, and game-based learning to teach some of these skills. So, for example, in our ropes course, which you saw some photos of earlier, it's a chance for them to practice a lot of those leadership skills of stepping up and stepping back, to have flexible leadership depending on what the group needs. And we borrow some pedagogical tools from Theater of the Oppressed, using forum theater coming out of Freire. To look at how to identify different social norms and disrupt them, sort of practicing in skits, things that they might do back at school. So then lastly, what I want to spend most of my time talking about are these final integrative tasks, right? The final sort of assessment in hopefully an authentic real-world context where we can bring together social justice, moral reasoning, and use of these dialogical empathy skills. So the first one I want to talk about is color war. Did anyone participate in a color war at their camp? All right. If you haven't, there's a great This American Life about color war. It's sort of a classic summer camp activity. You divide up into teams for the day, compete all day, and at the end, after all the competitions and the cheering, some judges award, oh, you're the one that won, right? Classic competitive type of game. So we take a spin on that. So we do divide them into 4 colors, red, blue, green, and orange. But what they don't know is that during color war, some teams will be structurally advantaged and some will be structurally disadvantaged. So that starts out with just Ron and myself as the 2 judges and our counselors representing sort of the institutions and authority figures, just favoring different teams more. Oh, your poster is great. You guys clearly are artistic. Oh, this one, not so much, right? And then it becomes, during the competitions, us sort of unfairly judging, and including sometimes they get different equipment. We say, oh, Frisbee golf, sorry, we ran out of all the nice Frisbees, you got to use the foam one, right? And this kind of escalates throughout the day, and I want to make a note here that we are very careful here, very careful. This isn't important but complicated stuff. We're always checking in and either dialing down or dialing up sort of the inequality, depending on the reactions that we're getting. So this kind of culminates during lunch, where now the green and orange teams, which are the disadvantaged teams, need to serve the blue and red teams lunch. And the blue and red teams can spread out on the picnic tables, and the green and orange teams have to eat lunch sitting on tarps on the ground. And so at this point, kids generally get pretty pissed, right? And there are a variety of different reactions that I would love to talk to you about after the panel, if you would like to hear more. But of course, there is always some level of rebellion. And something that we've done, which may at first sound questionable, but I want to explain why we do it, is if a kid is really resisting a lot, saying this is not right, this isn't what Camp Common Ground is about, we say, okay, well, the order of our whole system here relies on you trusting our authority. If you're going to break that, we're going to call home. You're going to have to explain to your mom why you are disobeying the directors. And what we're doing there is not trying to punish someone. What we're doing is trying to use the simulation and use the metaphor to say, how confident are you in your beliefs around morality and your moral reasoning that this is wrong, that you're willing to face real consequences? And I hope you can see the metaphor for that in real life. Because that's ultimately what we're trying to prepare them to do, is to be moral actors in the real world. So then, of course, because this is a final assessment, right, a culminating task, we have to give them an opportunity to really show us what they would want to do. So Ron and I then leave during lunch. We say we have to tally up the points. We're going to go off campus for a little bit, and we check in over the walkies with the directors or with the counselors to see what the kids do. And every year is a little bit different. I'll just tell you, our first summer, when we came back, all the kids had washed off their face paint. They had changed out of their colors, and we're all sitting on the picnic benches together, integrated, wearing their Camp Common Ground t-shirts and glaring at us really defiantly, right? And of course, then we spend the afternoon debriefing and talking about how each of the different color groups actually corresponds with a different racial group, and talk about the different outcomes associated with each of those different groups. The next one I want to talk about is a little bit more complicated. This is called Camp New Direction. It's for our year 2 campers, so they've come back for a second summer. They've been working a lot on group decision-making skills. And so we tell them, you know what, you're going to be the directors for the day. So we bring them to a really isolated part of camp and say, Camp New Direction, you're the new directors. And we give them a series of tasks that directors might have to face. So you need to tell us who's going to be in which elective next week. So there's some level of moral reasoning there. Maybe they really want to do archery again, but they have to figure out, what's really fair. Then we kind of step it up and we say, there's this great overnight we do at Eagle's Nest where you sleep under the stars, and we make this up and we say, but the camp that we're renting from says they had a bad experience with having both boys and girls up there, so now only boys or girls can go up at a time, so you have to decide who's going to go up there in our camp, right? So pushing a little more of how do you make a moral decision in that context. There's some level of identity and equity. And then things get a little more intense. So after a few more challenges, then the campers see Ron and myself looking really worried and stressed out, and we're talking over the walkie really intensely. We're on the phone, and we come to them and we say, hey, I'm sorry, we have to stop the simulation. On the other side of camp with the year 1 campers, there's been a prank. And one of the campers was targeted. And so we faked a prank, right? So for an example, and again, this is very tricky, but we do this very intentionally. We try and pick something that's reasonable, that's believable. So for example, one summer, there was a boy, let's call him Michael, who was sometimes picked on. And part of that had to do with the fact that he performed his gender and sexuality a little bit differently than some other kids. And so we took tape and wrote on the mirror in the boys' bathroom, Michael must die. And then we took a photo of it and, of course, took it right down, right? So then we go to the campers and we say, hey, here's the photo. The 4 kids who did this fessed up immediately. And we've been on the phone with Michael's mom, and we wouldn't normally do this, but she said that, she knows that Michael can sometimes provoke kids, and she really wants to hear from his peers before we make any decision on the consequences for these 4 boys. And so we say, she'll call back in 10 minutes. You guys have a chance to discuss what you want to say to her. So that's the pictures you're looking at right now, is them having a phone call with my friend who's pretending to be Michael's mom, and them having to really work through moral reasoning and social justice and dialogue with one another to be able to make this difficult real-world decision, right? And, moral dilemma discussions, which I think are often considered a primary intervention for moral reasoning, are really abstract, right? And this is their friends. They don't want to see them go home. But, well, they broke this rule, some of our norms at camp, but are those just social conventions? Are those actually good rules that have some sort of universal morality? And so we're really forcing them to ask some of these tough questions and make a real decision. And then, of course, when we, after they have the phone call and we tell them that it was made up and they're really mad at us for a little bit, we then debrief, and we've actually video recorded the whole thing. And so then they spend the next day watching themselves, watching their group decision-making skills and their moral reasoning skills, and do a critical reflection on it. So probably a lot of you know more about the theory behind this than I do, but my undergraduate thesis work at UPenn was actually on game-based pedagogy for moral development. And I was really inspired by some of the stuff that Piaget talked about with games as mini societies, these rule-based systems where kids get to grapple with what is a fair rule. And one of my big takeaways was, and it was sort of mentioned earlier, which is great, is that really the co-construction of these game-based, these rule-based systems, these games, is really when kids have to grapple with not just how do I react to this rule, but if I got to run a society, what rules would I put in place? And when I think about the type of moral actors we're trying to cultivate, it's really folks who can self-govern in that way. Folks who can say, I can lead a group or lead a society, and I can think about what laws or rules should govern this space in a way that's going to be moral and equitable. So the last thing I'll say is some questions and directions. So one is, this is a fine line, right? Some of you may have raised your eyebrows at some of the stuff we were saying we did. This is one of the reasons we really try and be super research-based and work with researchers. And I don't know if any of you saw, but in 2018, there were some articles that came out in the SF Chronicle about some camps, some diversity camps that did this in a really bad way. And were really exposed, doing things like shouting slurs at minorities as a way to prepare them for the real world, right? And the article talked about how those were not research-based practices at all. Also, sort of when and where to do these kind of games and simulations. I don't know if at my school it's really a safe place to do something like this. Although I do think a place like PE offers a lot of opportunity right now that's not being utilized for game-based learning. And lastly, measurement. These are really hard. Should we be analyzing these videos? How do we code stuff? Well, we got a bunch of researchers in the room. Would love to talk to any of you afterwards about how to do that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, can we give another round?